Hello world! Today we venture into the Burning Lands, in search of demonic remains. And while the Junker Queen hasn't left us a hell of a lot to work with, there's actually a lot to examine in trying to understand the 5 metal demons and the feral Omnics. You already have basically all the context that I do via the intro, so we're just going to dive straight into things. You first have to consider the interpretation of the word feral, remembering that this comes from an extrapolative Junker song of legend that may or may not actually exist in world, so you do have to take everything said there with a grain of salt, but everything mentioned does seem to come across as if it is common knowledge, shared by the Junkers, understood about the Junker Queen from an outside perspective. You could obviously address the idea that it's all a fabrication of her mind and internalization of her grief and isolation, but there's a bunch of reasons why I think you can rule that out ultimately, and it kind of kills off the discussion. So we're going to be taking it as if it is truth, but with a degree of misinterpretation. Again, they are called feral from an outside perspective. So does that mean that the Omnics have in fact regressed? Is that what feral means? They were sapient and have lost some form of executive function? Did they never actually have any? Are they in a sense incomplete, and then why? Have they been infected by an outside source to reduce their degree of self-agency? Are they actually being controlled by a further party that doesn't have to be an outside source? Or is it a complete misinterpretation, and the behavior of the Omnics that seems feral is purely motivated by anger and vengeance for what has been done to them? As you can see, all of the feral Omnics are visually individualized, they all seem to be driven towards a certain goal, and they seem to be emotive to an extent, not just confined to anger. So it's very unlikely that these beings are totally lacking in self-agency. You then have to consider their relationship to the destroyed Omnium and the past of the Australian government and the Outback. You then have to look at their relationship to the Crisis and the Awakening in terms of timeline, in terms of motivation, in terms of degree of self-agency. And to me, that all points to the idea that the ferality must be an after effect of the Omnium destruction. The land of the Outback that was given to the Omnics would logically have been given to peaceful and sapient Omnics emerging late post-Crisis. There's no way they would have given the land to the feral Omnics. This must be a change that has happened since then, and the clearest thing to have caused that would have been the destruction of the Omnium. You then have to consider how the feral Omnics are then related to the 5 metal demons and the Junker Queen and her crusade against them. She goes out to break the curse of the 5 metal demons, and the whole piece seems to portray them as the leaders, controllers, or perhaps even the creators of the feral Omnics. They are definitely represented as a force above the feral Omnics themselves, enough to create something that was known as a curse. The only likely thing that can actually be would be the proliferation of feral Omnics. Like you can see, even though the song and the imagery is, again, representative to an extent, the 5 metal demons seem to be considered an allied party. They seem to be a group that works together, whether she defeated them together or not. They definitely seem to be beings with their own agency and ability to plan together for a specific cause. With all that in mind, you then can try and consider how and why each of these beings, the feral Omnics and the 5 metal demons, exist post-Omnium, post-Awakening, and post-Crisis. All of those are important in trying to figure out where these beings came from. Are any of them pre-existing to any of those events, or are they new in some way, actually coming about after those events? Then there's the differences between the two. Why the 5 metal demons don't have the glowing red eyes that the feral Omnics do, again leads back into that idea that perhaps they are controlling the feral Omnics, which makes them feral and constitutes a curse that defeating the 5 metal demons could theoretically end. You then want to look at why the 5 metal demons are so big and so engineered in the way they are, especially considering, again, when they are most likely to have existed at first, after the Crisis and the Awakening, but before the Omnium destruction, to be part of the Omnics that the Australian government gave land to. So you then do have to consider who built them originally, when and why. Obviously the Omnium built them, right? Because all the Omnics came from the Omnium, so this is definitely pre-Omnium destruction, right? But then why were they so big to be existing peacefully? These can't be titans that were used as weapons of war, as you may even notice from some of their visual designs. Most of them that we can see seem to be originally purposed as construction Omnics, or giant Omnics that were part of the Omnium used in the creation of smaller regular Omnics. You can even see at least one of the 5 metal demons has been either designed or retrofitted to interact with the regular Omnics. It has a ladder in its leg leading inside its leg. Like, that either has to have originally been a piece of infrastructure, which an Omnic, a giant Omnic, could have been a piece of infrastructure within an Omnium. See where I'm going, right? And at least in its time as one of the 5 metal demons, that ladder and that internal hollowed out bit probably contained Omnics. It was like a hive giant Omnic. You can then also consider why one of the other 5 metal demons has arms made from Omnic bodies. That to me suggests a familiarity with working with the Omnic form, almost as if they were part of the Omnic production process, right? Whether that's actually a part of them creating new Omnics now, or is just a leftover element of where they came from originally, both of those things tie back to them being linked to the Omnium itself, rather than being these sort of more independent Omnics. You can then also sort of ask the question, who augmented all of them? We can see that, like the feral Omnics, the 5 metal demons have been visually, and possibly technically, augmented. And you can then ask, again, who did that, when and why? Was it actually the feral Omnics, and the metal demons are war machines of theirs, or was it the 5 metal demons themselves? And what sort of questions does that raise about their degree of agency being like part of the original Omnium? You can then actually, again, lead back to why they'd be doing what they're doing. Vengeance for the Omnium would make a ton of sense as their motivation, even if they were just Omnics. But if they were Omnics who were genuinely like part of the fabrication of the facility itself, they haven't just lost their mother, that every other Omnic has when the Omnium was destroyed. They've lost their original body. These things were possibly literally like organs and internal pieces of the Omnium that since its destruction are now running off sort of fragments of original code, allowing them to sustain a degree of self-agency to bring themselves up to the point they are now. The idea of them then building new Omnics further even fits that idea, as their methods can be seen as an attempt to replicate their original purpose. The way that they were waging war 10 odd years ago that it was, came from how they originally existed. I'm bringing up actually the fact that it was 10 years ago, and the point that there was a curse that the Junker Queen broke in defeating them, and the feral Omnics haven't been actually like mentioned in the modern day, again further suggests that the 5 metal demons were the ones with the true agency. They were replicating the Omnium, pseudo-producing new, feral, incomplete, most likely, Omnics. You then can also consider, finally, that they had claimed a particular territory known as the Burning Lands. And when you consider why the Outback is irradiated, like it was the Omnium blowing up, right? Where is that now? Junkertown is built from the Omnium's wreckage. That's another thing that would make the 5 metal demons pretty pissed at the Junkers, that they're desecrating their original body, right? Junkertown is where there should be the most radiation. There's actually a ton of mentions in recent voice lines about like a 3-armed Luke, a 6-eyed cat, double cows, which are like a reference to Fallout's Brahmin. All of those exist around Junkertown. Mutations, and radiation specifically, is way more focally present in Junkertown. So why would there be a different area of the Outback known as the Burning Lands, right, when it's very unlikely to be the place where there is a focus of radiation? It's not. It was likely known as the Burning Lands, either through its desecration by the Omnics and the 5 metal demons, or that it was burning with the fires of industry. That again, to tie back to my whole theory that I've probably spent way too long on here, the 5 metal demons were most likely making the feral Omnics in an attempt to replicate their original purpose as part of the Omnium. But that's probably not the last of them. I'd like to think that Mason Howl is going to be the one who brings these guys back up somehow in the future. as it's probably the only way he's ever going to be relevant to Junkertown again. Perhaps he'll make a new mech out of their remains, or even a new mini Omnium to control his own feral Omnics, maybe? He could even accidentally cause the 5 metal demons to transcend post-mortem, reforming them together to make a singular grand devil Omnic, or a metal archdemon, whatever batshit nonsense you want to call it. There is a ton of potential in the Overwatch universe, and as we move into the sequel, I just hope that they can actualize on some of that. Thank you for staying with me, friends. I've been Euclidean Vision. Take care of yourselves out there, teammates, and may the glorious light of demonic vengeance shine within you. Bye-bye.